Welcome. Settle in and take your time getting comfortable. Tonight we're going to a small settlement on the Norwegian coast in the age of the Vikings, a little over 1,000 years ago. It's autumn, and the mist sits low on the fjord in the mornings. We'll spend one ordinary day there with a blacksmith, the forge banked back to life before light, iron drawn and folded and shaped at the anvil, a blade quenched and set aside, small trades with neighbours, a meal, and the slow cooling of the fire as evening comes on. Nothing important happens. You're not meant to hear the end of it. Sleep well. We begin in the hour before dawn. It is the hour before dawn, and you wake in the loft above the smithy to a cold so complete that your breath shows even under the blankets. Below you, through the gaps in the floor planks, the forge is a low red eye in the dark, banked the night before under a blanket of ash and unburned charcoal, kept alive rather than fed. The settlement outside is silent. Somewhere down toward the water, a rope creaks against a mooring post, and then nothing. You climb down the ladder in wool socks and pull on your leather apron, stiff with the night's cold, and crouch at the forge. You do not blow on it yet. First you rake back the grey ash with the tip of an iron poker, slowly, until you find the seam of dull orange beneath. Still breathing on its own after all these hours, you lay on a few knuckles of dry charcoal, unhurried. The bellows are two stitched leather sacks, worn soft and dark with handling, and you work the handle in a slow, even rhythm. Not fast, just steady, the way you were taught as a boy. With each push, a breath of air runs down the clay pipe into the coals, and the dull orange answers it, spreading until small tongues of flame stand up out of the charcoal, and the hearth begins quietly to glow. While the fire climbs toward working heat, you take stock of the bench by grey early light, an unfinished knife blade cooling from yesterday, a coil of thin iron rod for nail making, a broken strap hinge, a neighbour left to be mended. None of it is urgent. You lay a hand flat on the stone edge of the forge, feeling for the warmth to rise, and wait, in no hurry, for the iron to be ready before you are. Outside the doorway, the fjord is still black, but the ridgeline above it has gone the colour of wet slate, which is how you know dawn is coming, rather than seeing it. Gulls call once, far off over the water, and fall quiet again. Somewhere behind you in the settlement, a dog turns over and settles. You have always liked this hour, before anyone needs anything from you, when the whole day is still folded up and waiting. You bank a second layer of charcoal onto the now steady flame and set the tongs within reach, and the poker and the small water trough you keep filled from the stream that runs past the smithy wall. The trough water is so cold this time of year that steam will lift off it the moment hot iron touches it, and you have learned over many winters exactly how long to hold a blade under before it shocks rather than tempers. The smithy itself is small, one room of turf and timber, with the forge at its heart, and a smoke hole cut in the roof above it, patched last spring with fresh sod that has not yet fully taken root. Along one wall, hammers of different weights hang from pegs beside punches and chisels, and a set of tongs shaped for different widths of stock. You inherited half of these tools from the smith who taught you, and you have made the rest yourself, slowly, over years. A wooden block, the cut stump of an old oak, holds your anvil, a solid iron mass, flat-faced, set deep enough into the wood that it does not ring when struck. Only thuds, low and true. You run your palm across its face out of habit more than need, checking for nothing in particular. The same small ritual every morning before the first piece of iron ever touches it. The fire is nearly ready now. The coals gone from red to a paler orange-white at their hottest heart, and the whole small room has begun to warm, the cold retreating to the corners and the doorway. You strip off the outer wool you slept in, down to a plain linen shirt beneath the apron, because a smith works warm even on a cold morning. And by midday, you will be glad of every layer you removed. You choose the knife blade from yesterday first, since it is nearest to finished and your hands are not yet tired. It has been rough-shaped already, drawn out from a bar of bloomery iron over 2 long sessions, and this morning's work is the finer part, straightening the edge, thinning it evenly, coaxing the last crookedness out of the metal before it ever meets a whetstone. You lay the blade in the coals with the tongs and turn it slowly, watching the colour climb through the metal. Dull red, then cherry, then the bright orange that tells you it will move easily under the hammer without cracking. Iron speaks in colour before it speaks in anything else. And reading it correctly is most of what separates a careful smith from a wasteful one. When it is ready, you draw it out onto the anvil in one unhurried motion and begin, the hammer falling in a steady cadence, not hard blows, but exact ones, each aimed at a particular high point or curve you have already marked in your mind. The sound rings out into the grey morning, iron on iron, and somewhere down the slope a door opens and closes in answer. Someone else's day beginning too. You work the blade in short heats, 3 or 4 hammer strokes, and then back into the coals, because iron cools quickly in the open air, and cold iron under a hammer only splits or dulls the edge you are trying to sharpen. Between heats, you pump the bellows a few slow strokes to keep the fire alive. And in the pause, you turn the blade over in the tongs, checking its line against the light from the doorway. By the 4th or 5th heat, the blade has taken on the shape you want, straight-backed with a long, even curve toward the point, the kind of knife a man carries at his belt for every small daily task rather than for show. You set it aside on a stone ledge near the fire, still faintly warm, to be filed and wetted properly once the day's heavier work is finished. Next, you turn to the coil of thin rod, iron drawn out weeks ago, and set by for exactly this purpose. Nails. A settlement like this one is always short of nails. For boat repairs, for house timbers, for the small endless mending that keeps a place standing through a northern winter. And a morning spent making them is a morning well spent, even if no single nail is remarkable. Nail making has its own small rhythm, one you could do half asleep by now. Heat the rod's end, draw it to a point on the anvil's edge, cut it to length with a sharp blow of the hardy set into the anvil's face, then set the stub into a nail header and hammer a flat head onto it in 4 quick taps. 1 nail. Then the rod goes back into the coals, and another. The light through the doorway has changed while you worked, grey giving way to the pale gold of a sun still below the ridge, but no longer far from it, and the mist over the fjord has begun to thin at its edges, showing the dark hulls of 2 boats drawn up on the shingle below the settlement. Smoke is rising now from more than one roof. The morning is properly awake. You count out a dozen nails onto the bench, then a dozen more, laying them in neat rows the way you always do. Less for tidiness than because a scattered pile of small iron pieces is the fastest way to lose one in the ash and rushes underfoot. 24 should be enough for whatever the day brings, and if it is not, the rod is long and there is time. A figure passes the doorway without stopping, headed down toward the shore, and lifts a hand to you without breaking stride. You lift the tongs in answer, which is greeting enough between men who have known each other their whole lives and have work of their own to get to. The smithy door stays open even in the cold, because a closed door here would only mean something was wrong. You feed the fire again, a double handful of charcoal from the sack by the wall. Charcoal you burned yourself in a pit up in the birch woods 2 months ago, tending it for a full day and night until the wood had gone to black coal without ever catching open flame. It is slow, patient work, charcoal burning, but a smith who buys his fuel instead of making it pays for that convenience all winter long. With the nails set aside, you allow yourself a short pause, straightening your back, which has begun to ache or in the low, familiar way it always does by mid-morning, and stepping to the doorway to breathe air that is not thick with smoke. The sun has cleared the ridge now, low and pale, laying long shadows down the slope toward the water. Somewhere a hen complains loudly about something and is ignored. Back at the forge, you turn to the broken hinge left for mending, a strap of iron torn clean through at its bend, the kind of failure that comes from years of a heavy door swinging on it in all weathers. You could make a new one, faster than you could explain why. But the owner asked for a mend, and iron, unlike wood, can usually be persuaded to become whole again if you have the patience for it. You bring both broken ends to welding heat, well past the orange of ordinary work, into a near-white brightness that throws sparks if you strike it too soon. And you know from long practice exactly the moment it is ready. A faint shimmer on the surface, almost like water, that tells you the iron itself has softened enough to take another piece of iron into itself and become one thing again. You lay the two ends together on the anvil and strike, once, hard and true, and then again, faster now while the heat holds. folding the seam over on itself and driving it down until the join is sound. A shower of small bright sparks scatters off the anvil's edge and dies in the air before it reaches the floor. When you turn the strap over, the break has become a thickened, ugly seam, but a seam that will hold. You will dress the weld smooth later, filing it down until it is barely visible, but for now, you set the hinge aside to cool slowly in the air rather than the trough, because iron cooled too fast right after welding can turn brittle at exactly the place you most need it strong. Patience again. Always patience. More than strength is the true material a smith works in. The forge has settled into the easy, self-sustaining heat of a morning well underway, and you allow it to burn a little lower while you rest your arm and drink from a skin of water kept by the door. Through the doorway, the settlement has come fully alive. Someone driving 2 goats up the slope. A woman calling a child's name without any particular urgency. The steady knock of an axe splitting wood somewhere behind the hall. A boy appears at the doorway, perhaps 10 years old, sent by his father to ask whether the ploughshare is ready, and you tell him truthfully that it is not, that iron does not hurry for anyone, and that his father will have it before the ground needs turning again. The boy accepts this without complaint, the way children raised near a forge learn early that the fire has its own patient schedule. He lingers a moment anyway, watching the coals with the frank fascination all children seem to have for fire, and you let him work the bellows twice under your hand, guiding the motion, before sending him off with a small offcut of iron shaped roughly like a fish. A trinket that costs you nothing and will occupy him happily for an hour. Then the doorway is empty again, and the smithy is quiet, but for the fire's breathing. You turn now to a length of good iron, set aside for a proper knife. Not the plain working blade from this morning, but a finer one, promised to a fisherman's wife for cutting cloth and thread. Work that rewards a thinner, more carefully drawn edge. You have been saving a particularly clean bar of bloomery iron for it, free of the black slag lines that weaken a blade's spine. Working good iron is slower than working ordinary iron, because you cannot afford the small mistakes that a heavier, cruder piece would simply absorb. You draw the bar out gradually, heat by heat, watching the grain of the metal reveal itself under the hammer, patient in a different register than the hinge mending patience. This is the patience of someone shaping something meant to outlast the person who ordered it. The sun climbs higher outside, and the smithy's single shaft of daylight through the doorway swings slowly across the earthen floor, marking the hour as well as any of the notched sticks some households keep for the purpose. You do not need to look at it to know it is approaching midday. Your stomach has already told you, quietly, twice. Still, you finish the heat you are on before setting anything down, because leaving iron half-shaped in the coals wastes both fuel and the morning's careful work. You draw the blade to its final rough length, check it once against the light for straightness, and only then bank the fire low, covering it the same way you covered it the night before, ready to wake again after you eat. You wash the worst of the soot from your hands and forearms in the cold trough water, wincing at the sting of it, and hang the leather apron on its peg by the door. The smithy, with its fire banked, cools quickly into something closer to the outside air, and you are glad, for a little while, of the wool tunic you left behind this morning, now pulled back on over the linen. The path from the smithy up to the hall is short, worn bare by years of exactly this walk, past the drying racks where fish hang in long silver rows, and past the low turf-roofed byre where the household's cattle are kept through the worst of the winter still to come. Smoke rises from the hall's roof vent in a thick grey column, promising warmth and something cooking. Inside, the long central hearth runs nearly the length of the hall, and your wife tends a pot hung over it on an iron chain of your own making. One of the first useful things you ever forged as a young smith, and still in daily service years later. The smell of barley porridge and dried fish fills the smoky air, along with wood smoke and the particular warm animal smell of a well-lived-in longhouse. You sit on the long bench along the wall, close enough to the fire to feel it properly, after a morning spent tending a different one, and your wife ladles porridge into a wooden bowl for you without needing to be asked. The two of you moving through this midday ritual with the ease of people who have shared thousands of these meals already and expect to share thousands more. Your two children eat beside you, the younger one still small enough to need reminding not to reach across the older one's bowl. And the talk around the hearth is unremarkable. A neighbour's cow that wandered onto the wrong plot, whether the herring will run early this year, whether the broken hinge you mended this morning was really worth the trouble the owner made about it. You eat slowly, in no hurry to be finished, tearing flatbread to scoop the last of the porridge and washing it down with a cup of thin, slightly sour ale, brewed in the hall last month. The bench is hard, and the smoke stings your eyes now and then, when the wind shifts outside. But none of this troubles you. It has never troubled you, being simply the shape of an ordinary meal. Your wife mentions between one spoonful and the next that a trader's boat was sighted farther down the fjord this morning, working its way along the coast, and that it may reach the settlement before evening. Traders mean news from other places, and sometimes iron ore or good whetstone brought from elsewhere, and you note it without much excitement, the way you note most things that may or may not happen. When the meal is finished, you do not linger long, though you allow yourself a few more minutes by the hearth than strictly necessary, watching the flames settle and half listening to your wife and the older child argue gently about whether the goats have been milked yet. Then you rise, stretch the stiffness of the morning's hammering out of your shoulders, and start back down the worn path to the smithy. The afternoon greets you with a fire gone to embers under its blanket of ash, exactly as you left it, and you rebuild it the same unhurried way you did before dawn. Rake, breathe, feed, wait, the whole ritual so familiar by now that your hands know it without your mind needing to be fully present for it. By the time the flames stand up properly again, your thoughts have already moved on to the afternoon's real task. Down at the shore, one of the settlement's boats has been hauled up onto rollers for its autumn repair. Its clinker-built hull needing new rivets where the iron has rusted thin along the overlapping planks. And this afternoon's work is theirs. A good number of boat rivets and their small square roves. Plain but exacting work, since a rivet that fails at sea is worse than no rivet at all. You draw out rod after rod of iron for the rivet shafts, each one needing to be close to identical in thickness, so the boat builder's holes will take them cleanly. and you find a rhythm in the repetition that is almost restful. Heat, draw, cut, set aside, heat again. The mind free to wander, even while the hands stay exact. The way a task done 10,000 times eventually becomes. The forge fire is hungrier this afternoon than it was in the cooler morning air, and you feed it more often, watching the charcoal sack by the wall grow visibly lighter. You will need to burn another pit's worth before winter closes in properly. A task for some dry week soon. Up in the birch woods with a spade and a great deal of patience. But that is a concern for another day, not this one. A shadow falls across the doorway, and you look up to find the boat builder himself, come to see how the rivets progress. A broad, quiet man with hands as scarred by wood splinters as yours are by sparks. He counts the finished pile, without quite seeming to, nods once, and settles onto an upturned log by the door to wait for more. Content to watch you work rather than make conversation, neither of you particularly wants. You work on companionably in his presence. The only sounds the bellows, the hammer, and now and then a low remark from him about the boat's condition, how the strakes near the bow have weathered worse than he'd hoped, how he thinks she has one more hard winter of use in her before real timber work is needed rather than iron. You listen more than you answer, which suits you both. By the time the afternoon light has begun to slant properly toward gold, you have a heap of finished rivets and roves laid out on a scrap of hide, enough for the section of hull he came about, and he gathers them carefully into a leather pouch, promising a portion of the autumn's dried cod in exchange. A fair trade you have made with him, in one form or another, most years since you both were young men. Alone again, you allow yourself a longer pause than usual, stepping outside to look down at the fjord, where the mist has burned away entirely now, and the water lies flat and pewter-coloured, under a sky gone the pale, thin blue of a northern autumn afternoon. Far off, near the mouth of the fjord, a single sail shows, small and pale. The trader's boat, perhaps, still some hours from arriving. You return to the fire and turn, at last, to the ploughshare the boy's father is waiting on. A heavier piece of work than anything else today, requiring a thick bar of iron, drawn and shaped into a broad curved edge that will spend next spring cutting through cold, root-tangled soil. It is not delicate work like the fisherman's wife's knife. It is blunt, patient, muscular work, and your arm feels every stroke of it. The hammer falls heavier now, and the fire must be hotter and held longer between blows. The iron slower to move and quicker to cool on a piece this thick. You find yourself falling into the older rhythm your first master taught you for heavy work. Full swings from the shoulder rather than the wrist. Breath timed to the strike. The whole body used rather than just the arm, because heavy iron punishes anyone who tries to shape it with the arm alone. Sweat runs freely now, despite the cooling afternoon air outside. And you pause more often than you did this morning, not from any failing of will, but because heavy work like this cannot be rushed without ruining both the iron and the smith. Between heats, you drink again from the water skin, and once, briefly, step to the doorway, simply to feel air that is not radiating heat back at your face. The ploughshare takes shape slowly across a dozen heats, its curve deepening a little more with each return to the anvil. And you check it now and then against a rough wooden template kept for exactly this purpose. One worn smooth from years of the same comparison. It is not yet finished. It will need another session tomorrow. Perhaps two. But by late afternoon, it has become recognizably what it is meant to be. You bank the fire lower than before, conserving both charcoal and your own strength, and turn instead to smaller, gentler tasks that a tired arm can still manage well. Filing the morning's plain knife blade toward its final edge, the rasp moving in long, even strokes, the metal singing faintly under it, a sound you have always found strangely soothing after a day of louder ones. The light through the doorway has gone properly gold now, low and warm, the particular colour of a northern afternoon sliding toward evening, and it catches the drifting smoke from the forge in slow turning threads that rise and vanish through the roof gap. You pause the filing a moment simply to watch it, one of the small, wordless pleasures of a trade that keeps you near fire and light all day. Someone passes the doorway, calling that the trader's boat has indeed turned in toward the settlement, its sail now visible without squinting. and you note the news the same unhurried way you noted it at midday, though you allow yourself to wonder, briefly, whether there might be good whetstone aboard, or a length of decent steel from somewhere south, the kind of thing worth walking down to see for yourself. Later, once the day's iron is properly finished. You return to the knife, testing its edge now and then against the pad of your thumb, not to cut, but to feel. The particular fineness a truly sharp edge announces before it ever touches anything. It is close now, close enough that another quarter-hour of careful stonework will finish what the file began. And you find, as always at this stage, a certain satisfaction in work nearing its quiet, unremarkable completion. The whetstone lives in a leather pouch by the anvil, worn concave in its middle from years of exactly this use, and you wet it from the trough and draw the blade across it in long, even passes, alternating sides, the motion so practiced you could do it with your eyes closed, and very nearly do, watching instead the last of the gold light climb the smithy's far wall. When the edge is finished, you test it against a scrap of leather, drawing it through in one smooth pass, and it parts clean and quiet, which is all the confirmation you need. You wipe the blade dry, oil it lightly against the damp sea air, and set it beside the day's other finished work. The nails, the mended hinge, the boat rivets already gone to the shore. A modest, ordinary tally for an ordinary day. The fire has burned low enough now that the smithy has begun to cool properly, the last of the afternoon's heat leaking out through the open doorway into air that carries the first real edge of evening. You feed the coals just enough to keep them from dying outright. The same careful economy you use every evening, banking rather than building, because tomorrow's fire begins from tonight's embers, not from nothing. You allow yourself to sit for a while on the same log the boat builder used earlier, letting your arms rest properly for the first time since midday, and look out at the settlement in its late afternoon business. Smoke from every roof now, a woman carrying water up from the stream, two men hauling something heavy down toward the newly arrived trader's boat, which has indeed come to rest against the shingle below. You decide, without much debate, that the walk down to see the trader can wait until the finished work is properly stowed and the smithy set right for the night, because iron and tools left carelessly out have a way of disappearing into the mud or the damp overnight, and a smith who cannot keep his own bench in order has no business being trusted with anyone else's mending. You gather the day's finished pieces, the ploughshare still needing more work, the mended hinge, the fine knife now properly sharp, and set each in its place along the shelf that runs above the bench, out of the way of stray sparks and out of reach of anything that might wander in from outside during the night, though little ever does. The tools go back on their pegs in the order you always keep them. Heavier hammers nearest the anvil, lighter ones farther along, tongs by the width of stock they are shaped to hold, an order that has less to do with tidiness than with the plain fact that a hand reaching for a tool in poor evening light needs to find the right one without looking. You sweep the worst of the day's scale, an ash away from the anvil's base, with a bundle of birch twigs kept for the purpose. Not out of any real fastidiousness, but because loose scale underfoot is how a tired smith turns an ankle at the end of a long day. And a turned ankle means no forge fire at all until it mends. Outside, the light has gone properly amber now, the sun somewhere behind the western ridge, though not yet fully set, and the fjord has taken on the deep, burnished colour water gets in the last real hour of an autumn afternoon. Smoke from a dozen roofs leans very slightly in the same direction, following whatever faint breeze has come up off the water with the turning of the day. You bank the forge properly now for the evening. Ash over coal, coal over the last true flame, the same careful sequence you followed at dawn, but in reverse, ensuring enough heat survives beneath the covering to be woken again tomorrow without needing to build an entirely new fire from cold. It is, in its way, the most important single task of the whole day, though it takes only a few minutes. With the fire settled, you finally allow yourself the walk down to the shore, unhurried, apron left behind on its peg, hands still faintly grey with soot despite the earlier washing. The trader's boat sits low and broad against the shingle, its crew already unloading bundles onto the stones, while a small gathering of villagers looks on with the mild, unhurried curiosity of people for whom a trader's visit is a pleasant break rather than an event. You recognize the trader from previous autumns, a wiry, weathered man who deals mostly in things a settlement like this cannot easily make for itself. Good whetstone from a quarry somewhere south, a little raw silver by weight, occasionally a length of proper southern steel, far finer than anything worked from local bog iron, though never cheap and never plentiful. You exchange a few words with him. Nothing urgent, mostly news. A poor harvest 2 fjords over. A chieftain's hall roofed anew somewhere down the coast. The ordinary currency of gossip that travels with anyone who moves between settlements. He mentions, almost in passing, that he has a little good whetstone aboard, and you nod, unhurried, saying you may come back for a piece before he sails on. You do not buy anything tonight. Trading well, you have learned over many years, is rarely done in the first excited minutes of a boat's arrival, when prices run high on both sides simply from the novelty of new faces. Better to let the evening settle, let the trader unload and eat, and grow a little more willing to bargain honestly once the day's travel is behind him. You walk a little way along the shingle instead, past the hauled-up repair boat with its half-finished row of new rivets catching the last light, past children chasing something small and quick along the tide line, past 2 older men mending a net with the unhurried competence of hands that have mended 10,000 nets before this one. The air here by the water carries salt and weed and the particular cold that comes off open water, even on a mild evening, different from the wood smoke and iron air of the smithy. And you breathe it in deliberately, the way you do most evenings at this point in the day, a small private ritual marking the shift from work to whatever comes after it. The tide is on its way out, leaving a dark, wet band of exposed stone and weed below the dry shingle. And a heron stands motionless at its edge, waiting with a patience that puts even a smith's patience to shame. You watch it a while, without any particular purpose, the way you watch most things at the end of a working day, simply because your eyes have finally been given permission to rest on something that asks nothing of them. By the time you turn back up the path toward the hall, the sky above the ridge has gone the deep violet blue that comes just after true sunset in this season, with one or two of the brighter stars already showing faintly in the east. Smoke still rises from every roof, thicker now as evening fires are built up properly for cooking, and the whole settlement has taken on the low golden glow of firelight showing through doorways and smoke holes. Your own hall's fire greets you with real warmth as you duck through the low doorway, the central hearth built up now well beyond its midday size. And your wife is already at it, turning something in an iron pan you made for her 3 winters ago, a small vanity of yours that it has held up so well under daily use since. You wash again, more thoroughly this time, at the basin kept by the door, working the days ground in soot from beneath your fingernails with a stiff brush, a losing battle you fight every evening regardless, since a smith's hands never come entirely clean, only cleaner, and everyone in the household has long since stopped expecting otherwise. The evening meal is heartier than the midday one. Fish caught that morning, root vegetables from the small plot behind the hall, more of the flatbread, and this time a proper portion of ale, rather than the thin midday cup, and you eat it seated close by the fire with your family around you. The day's separate errands and labours folding back together into one shared evening. Your older child asks, as they often do, to hear about some piece of the day's work, and you tell them, plainly and without much embellishment, about the welded hinge and how a break in iron can be persuaded to become whole again with enough heat and enough patience. A small lesson offered the same unhurried way most things are taught in this household, through ordinary conversation rather than instruction. The younger child has already begun to nod against your wife's shoulder, worn out by whatever a small child's day consists of, and no one moves to correct this or hurry it along. The hall settles by degrees into its evening quiet, the scrape of bowls being set aside, low talk near the hearth, someone further down the room beginning, very softly, to hum something half remembered. You linger by the fire, longer than strictly necessary, in no hurry to move, watching the flames the way you often watch the forge's flames during the day, though these ask nothing of you in return. No hammer, no bellows, nothing but your presence. It is one of the few times in the day your hands are entirely still, and you notice it briefly, the way you notice most restful things only once they have already arrived. Talk around the hearth turns, unhurried, to small settlement matters. Whether the trader's whetstone is worth the asking price. Whether the weather will hold long enough to finish drying this year's fish properly. Whether old Ingrid's cough has eased any since the last frost. None of it requires you to do anything but listen. And you find you are content simply to do that, letting the evening's talk wash past you like the tide. Someone mentions in passing that the boat builder was pleased with the afternoon's rivets, and your wife glances your way with the small, familiar pride she has always taken in your work, without ever making a great show of it, and you feel, briefly, and without needing to name it, the particular satisfaction of a day's labour, having been quietly useful to people you have known your whole life. The fire is fed once more. A good armful of wood that will burn down slowly through the first part of the night, and the hall's other occupants begin, one by one, to settle towards sleep. Furs pulled close on the sleeping benches along the walls. Low murmured good nights. The particular unhurried choreography of a household that has shared this same space every night for years and needs no discussion to arrange itself. You are not ready for sleep yet yourself, and step back outside briefly, into air gone properly cold now. The sky overhead fully dark and thick with stars, in a way it never is in brighter, busier places. The kind of sky that makes a person feel, not unpleasantly, quite small and quite temporary against it. Down the slope, the smithy sits dark and quiet, its banked fire invisible from this distance, patiently holding its small ember of heat through the night, the same way it has every night for years, waiting to be woken again tomorrow before dawn. You can just make out its low turf roof against the paler dark of the hillside behind it. A familiar shape you would know blindfolded. Somewhere down by the shore, a little laughter carries faintly on the still air. Probably the trader's crew settling in for their own evening, sharing whatever news and ale the settlement has offered them tonight. You think again, briefly and without urgency, about the whetstone, deciding you will walk down properly in the morning, once the day's forge work is well underway, when both you and the trader will bargain more honestly than either of you would tonight. The cold finally persuades you back inside, and you duck once more through the low doorway into warmth and firelight and the settled breathing quiet of a household mostly asleep. Your wife is still awake, banking the hall's own fire the same careful way you banked the forge. Ash over coal, patience over haste. The two of you moving through parallel versions of the same nightly ritual without ever needing to remark on the resemblance. You settle onto the sleeping bench beside her, the furs heavy and warm after the cold outside air, and for a while, neither of you speaks, simply lying together in the hearth's low red light, listening to the small sounds of a hall at rest, the fire settling, someone further down the room breathing slow and even, the wind finding some small gap in the turf roof and sighing through it. Your arms ache pleasantly in the particular way they do at the end of a day spent properly used, hammer arm and bellows arm both, and you flex your fingers once under the furs, feeling the day's small accumulated stiffness there too. A familiar tally your body keeps without needing to be asked. The honest cost of good work honestly done. You think, drifting now, of tomorrow's list without any particular urgency, the ploughshare still needing its final shaping, more rivets likely if the boat builder finds he needs them, perhaps that walk down to see the trader's whetstone properly in daylight. None of it presses on you. It will all still be there in the morning, waiting the same patient way iron always waits, needing only the fire and your hands and enough time. The hall's fire has burned down to a deep, steady red, throwing almost no light now, but a great deal of quiet warmth. And somewhere near it your younger child murmurs something in their sleep and settles again. Outside, very faint, you can hear the sea against the shingle, the same steady sound it has made every night of your life, patient and unhurried and entirely unconcerned with anything happening on land. You think, before sleep properly takes you, of the smithy's own small ember, banked and waiting down the dark slope, holding its quiet heat through the cold hours, the same way it always has, ready to be woken again, with rake and breath and patience once the sky begins, once more, to pale toward another ordinary dawn. The wind outside has settled into a low, steady murmur against the turf roof, neither rising nor falling. The sound of a night with nothing dramatic in it, only the ordinary business of weather moving slowly along the coast the way it always does this time of year. It is a sound you have fallen asleep to more nights than you could ever count. And it asks nothing of you now, beyond simply being there, low and constant, at the edge of hearing. Your wife's breathing beside you has already gone slow and even, and the furs have warmed fully now, holding the day's last borrowed heat from the hearth and returning it back to you both. Somewhere near the far wall, one of the household's dogs shifts and sighs and settles again, and the hall, by small degrees, finishes its long slide from a place of talk and firelight into a place of simple, breathing quiet. You let your mind wander loosely over the day now, the way it often does just before sleep, not reviewing it exactly, more just letting pieces drift past. The cold of the pre-dawn floor, the shimmer of welding heat on the broken hinge, the boat builder's quiet company by the doorway, the heron patient at the tide line, your wife's small, proud glance across the evening fire. None of it insists on being remembered. It simply passes through, the way an ordinary day always does. The forge down the slope holds its ember the same way it always does, needing nothing further from you until morning. And there is something quietly restful in that thought, in knowing that the one thing in your day that must never be allowed to go fully cold is, at this exact moment, entirely and safely out of your hands, banked properly, waiting properly, asking nothing of you until you choose to wake it. Sleep is not far now. You can feel it approaching the way you can feel iron nearing welding heat. A softening, a readiness. Though unlike iron, it cannot be rushed toward or forced, only allowed to arrive in its own unhurried time. You do not fight it. You have never seen much use in fighting the arrival of anything that comes this gently. Far off, faint enough that you could easily imagine it rather than hear it, comes the low creak of a boat shifting at its mooring down by the shore. The trader's boat, most likely, settling against the tide, the way boats always do through a still night. A sound so distant and so unthreatening, it barely registers as sound at all. More a texture in the larger quiet. You think once more, briefly, of tomorrow's whetstone, and then let the thought go the way you have let every other thought go tonight, unfinished and unhurried, trusting that morning will still hold whatever it needs to hold, without your having to carry it through the night first. This has always seemed to you one of the small mercies of an ordinary life, that most things really can simply wait. The last of the hearth's visible flame has gone now, leaving only the deep, breathing red of true embers, banked the same careful way as the forge, holding just enough heat to greet the household again in the morning, without ever needing to be built entirely anew. The hall is dark now, but for that low red glow, and warm, and quiet, and entirely, gently still. Somewhere outside, very far off, a fox calls once across the hillside. A thin, strange sound swallowed almost immediately by the wind and the sea, and nothing in the hall stirs to answer it. It is simply one more small night sound among many, no different in its way from the boat's creak or the wind's murmur. Part of the same wide, patient darkness that holds the whole settlement now. Your breathing has slowed to match your wife's, without your quite noticing when it happened. The two of you settled into the same unhurried rhythm you have shared on this bench for so many years now, through so many ordinary nights just like this one, each of them ending, as this one is ending, in nothing more remarkable than sleep. The turf roof above you holds the day's last warmth a little longer than the open air outside would, a small kindness of the way this hall was built. Generations of small, careful choices, layered together, the same way iron is layered and folded towards strength, until the whole structure simply knows, in its walls and its roof, how to keep a household warm through a long northern night. You are aware, distantly now, of the ache in your arms easing into something closer to simple heaviness. The day's work settling into your body, the way it settles every evening, not as complaint, but as a kind of quiet accounting. Honest labour honestly spent. Nothing owed and nothing left undone that could not comfortably wait until morning. The wind shifts very slightly outside, and for a moment the low murmur against the roof changes pitch, and then settles back into its steady note, and you register the change and its passing, the way you register most small things now, from a growing distance, half already somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere without weight or task or hour. Down at the smithy, unseen and unattended, the banked fire continues its slow, patient burning, exactly as it will continue through every hour of this night, needing nothing, asking nothing, simply holding its small warmth in trust until hands return to wake it. The same quiet promise it has kept every night of your working life, and will keep again tomorrow. You think, one last time, and very faintly now, of the whole shape of the day just finished. Fire lit, iron drawn, blade shaped, hinge mended, rivets given over to the sea, a ploughshare waiting half finished for tomorrow's hands, and find in it nothing that needs revisiting, nothing unresolved, only the plain, sufficient fact of a day's honest work done. The dark around you has stopped feeling like something to notice at all, becoming instead simply the shape of where you are, warm and familiar, and entirely without threat. The hearth's last embers, a small, steady red at the edge of vision, dimming further now as sleep moves in properly to claim the last of your attention. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sea continues its slow, patient work against the shingle, drawing back and returning, drawing back and returning. A rhythm older than the settlement, older than iron, older than any single night's sleep. And it asks nothing of you now but to be, distantly heard, and then, gradually, no longer heard at all. Your wife murmurs something too soft to make out, more breath than word, and does not wake. And beside her you feel the last of your own waking thoughts loosen and drift apart, the way scattered charcoal loses its shape once the fire beneath it finally, fully, goes to rest. The hall holds its warmth around you, patient and complete, roof and wall and hearth all doing quietly through the dark hours, exactly what they were built to do, the same way the banked forge down the slope does exactly what it was built to do, the same way the sea does, the same way the wind does, each of them simply continuing, unhurried, into the night. There is nothing left now that requires you. The iron is set aside. The fire is banked. The household is settled. The tide is doing whatever the tide does, far off and entirely without your help. You are, for these last few conscious moments, simply a person lying warm in the dark, with nowhere left to be and nothing left to finish. The wind against the roof has softened further, or perhaps it is only that your hearing has begun to soften along with it. The two things no longer easily told apart, sound and sleep folding gently into one another, the way they always do at the very last edge of a long, ordinary day. Somewhere in that softened dark, the boy's fish-shaped offcut sits on a shelf in his family's house. The finer knife rests wrapped and waiting for the fisherman's wife. The mended hinge cools slowly toward true hardness, and the forge's ember holds it steady, unwatched red. Small, finished pieces of the day, scattered now across the sleeping settlement, each one quietly complete. You are not thinking in words any longer, only in loose, warm impressions. Firelight, the particular ring of a well-struck blow, the cold shock of the trough water, your wife's shoulder against yours by the evening hearth. None of it urgent, none of it holding on very tightly. All of it simply present the way the last light of a dying fire is present, before it too finally goes. The settlement around you sleeps in the same unhurried way it has slept every night for as long as anyone living there can remember. Turf roofs holding in warmth, banked fires holding in embers, the sea holding its long patient rhythm against the shore, all of it continuing quietly on without needing a single person awake to witness it. If you were to wake now, which you will not, there would be only darkness and warmth, and the wind's low, steady murmur. Nothing asking to be done, nothing waiting to be mended. The whole weight of tomorrow's iron, still comfortably, entirely, in tomorrow, where it belongs. The last coherent thought that passes through you is not really a thought at all, more a kind of settled certainty, wordless and complete, that the fire will still be there in the morning, banked and patient exactly as you left it, ready to be woken again with the same slow, familiar care it has always been woken with, whenever you are ready to rise and tend it. And beneath that certainty, sleep, which has been approaching all this while unhurried and unresisted, finally arrives in full, settling over you the way ash settles over embers, not extinguishing anything, only covering it gently, keeping its small warmth safe through all the dark hours still left before dawn. The hall breathes on quietly around its sleeping household. Hearth glowing low and steady, roof holding fast against the night wind, walls holding in a whole day's worth of gathered warmth, and nothing in it stirs now but the smallest, slowest movements of banked fire and settled breath. On and on, into the deep, unhurried hours of the night. Far off, the trader's boat shifts once more at its mooring, and is still. Far off, the fox that called earlier has gone quiet, moved on to some other quiet hillside errand of its own. Far off, the tide keeps drawing back and returning, back and returning, indifferent and constant, needing no one's attention to continue. Down the dark slope, the smithy's banked fire holds its small red heart exactly as it has every night, asking nothing, promising nothing beyond its own quiet continuation, patient the way only fire that has been properly, carefully tended can be patient, waiting out the whole long night for a hand that will, eventually, in its own good time, come back to wake it. There is nothing more to the night than this now. Warmth and dark, and the low, unhurried sounds of a settlement, and a sea, and a wind that have all, together, settled into rest. No task remains unfinished that cannot comfortably wait. No fire has been left carelessly to die. Everything that needed tending has been tended, and everything else can simply be trusted to hold until morning. The wind continues its soft, steady murmur against the turf roof, patient and unbroken, the same sound it will still be making when the sky, hours from now, finally begins its first pale thinning toward dawn, though that hour is far off yet, further than needs thinking about, further than anything tonight needs to reach. Sleep holds the whole hall now, gentle and complete, hearthlight dimming by slow degrees toward true dark, breath settling into breath, the day's iron and fire, and salt air and firelight all folded quietly away together into rest, the way every ordinary day here has always, eventually, been folded away. And so, the night continues, unhurried and entirely without event, the fire banked, the household sleeping, the sea patient against the shore, everything exactly where it should be, needing nothing further from you at all. Sleep well. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight.